After protests in February, Morocco's King Mohammed VI introduced some moderate reforms in June, and by November 25th, elections were held, a year ahead of schedule. However, this was not enough to stem growing unrest, as many Moroccans boycotted these elections, arguing that the country should have a fully constitutional monarchy. This week, Africa Today asks if events are now at the stage where Morocco's King Mohammed might be forced to sacrifice his powers in order to remain king.
After popular uprisings sweeping across North Africa threatened the rule of King Mohammed of Morocco, he ceded some powers and allowed for elections to choose a new government. The elections, the ninth in Morocco's history since independence nearly 6 decades ago, was a measure by the king to prevent those calling for reform to take to the street in similar revolts that have swept aside leaders of Tunisia, Egypt and Libya. The latest parliamentary polls were won by the Islamic Justice and Development Party. This was seen as a major development for the king, who had hoped to pacify disgruntled Moroccans. But instead, many boycotted the elections, claiming the proposed reforms by the king are not enough. An activist from the 20 February movement, Najib Chowki, said Moroccans are not happy with the king's proposed reforms, and in the coming days, more protests are planned to take place until demands for greater reforms and an end to entrenched corruption. Africa Today now finds out if Morocco is on the brink of more protests in the coming days.
Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Today. I'm Vuiswang Gobongwana. Aside from a king struggling with rapid change, Moroccans are facing challenging economic issues and have an appalling human rights record. When Mohammed came to power, he was seen as a modernizer, but he still retains some sweeping powers. The USA has defined Morocco as a non-NATO ally and praised its work in the US-led, quote, war on terror, unquote. But it seems that these domestic issues might determine what comes next. How are Moroccans transitioning from a feudal-style monarchy to a modern democracy? Here with me to discuss this universal problem are Ali Bahaiji, the publisher of North-South magazine, Dr. Saheeb Mustaqeem Blehr, the General Secretary of the Islamic Party of Great Britain, and on the phone from the US is political activist Siham Jihad. Thank you all so much for joining us. I believe, is it the Islamic Party of Great Britain or the UK?
Islamic Party of Britain.
Of Britain in general. But thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to ask you this question that a lot of people might be asking who are not perhaps familiar with the dynamics in Morocco. How do you think King Mohammed has managed to escape the Arab Spring?
Well, he's taken some initiatives which you've mentioned with these reforms, but let's not forget King Mohammed VI is extremely popular in Morocco. People distrust the political system, people distrust politicians, but they do not distrust the king. When he took power in 1999 after his father died, now his father Hassan II was a typical Arab king who was interested in spending his time abroad, spending Moroccan money abroad, was interested in alliances with European powers. King Mohammed VI, to the contrary, he married a local lady, he spends his holidays in the country, he is committed to the country and has brought rapid development and changes to Morocco that in a way make Morocco a very different place to all other Arab nations, a very liberal country compared to many other Arab states, also a very affluent country. Yes, there is poverty, there is corruption, there are issues, but generally it's a lot better than elsewhere.
Well,
and that is credited to the king personally.
Well, let me bring in someone who might have a different point of view. Siham Jihad joining us on the telephone there from the US. Siham, did you just hear that point of view expressed there by Dr. Saheeb?
Yes, I did.
What do you feel? I mean, obviously, you obviously have some points of disagreement. Where do you disagree with what he has just said?
Well, in 1999, when King Mohammed VI took over after the death of his father, Hassan II, in the very beginning, everybody had hopes because even as a prince, he showed a different approach than his father. His father had a very, very poor human rights record. And so everybody was looking forward to a new king, a younger blood, basically. The first 6 years, I agree that, personal development and the economic and political development in Morocco was on the rise. But after that, it kind of became stale and it hit a plateau, and then it started declining, which sparked all these protests and kind of the dissatisfaction of people with. And he was right in that, some of them say, or some of the protesters are angry with the kings, with the government, and with the kind of those surrounding the king. But the king is very popular in Morocco.
Okay, well, if I could just interrupt you there briefly, Sihad. A lot of people might not understand, Ali, about why this popularity for the king. Because part of the dynamic in the power structure is that he is, quote unquote, the commander of the faithful. How big a factor is this?
It's a very important factor, actually, for the Moroccans. It's a very unifying factor, because that's one of the most important, actually, aspects of his legitimacy. In Morocco is his religious role within the community itself, partly, and then the other part is that he has been a reformist. He has been a reformist since he actually took power in 1999, and since then he has been concentrating on improving the conditions of the poor, the conditions of prisoners. He created a commission for reconciliation for people who were abused in the past and violated. And this commission actually was televised, and the government recognized that these people were abused by the government, and they were compensated. There were over 3,500 people who were compensated by that. Since then, he has created a Commission of Human Rights, and the new commission, the National Commission of Human Rights today, can actually summon up any minister to come before it and answer if there are any violations against any individuals.
Okay, but nonetheless, though, Dr. Saheeb, these elections were boycotted by many people because essentially, under the current system, no power can be transferred to ordinary members of the public. They all reside with the king. Well, so was this a sham of democracy?
Well, sham of democracy, we need to compare things here. The electoral turnout was in the region of 45%.
That's disputed, by the way.
Well, everything can be disputed, but that is a turnout that is equivalent to the turnout we had in the last British elections for the age bracket 18 to 25. We had a larger turnout altogether, but let's not forget Morocco is a very young country. The majority of people are young people who are not as motivated to go voting as people of an older age bracket. So we have 60-something% in the UK, but the age bracket 18 to 25 is also 45%.
Well,
so
hold on.
Is
Let me
our
just
democracy a sham?
Well, you're saying, I mean, here, there's a young person on the phone, Siham there. There are people who did not feel motivated to take part in the electoral process because they didn't believe in it. What are your thoughts on the recent elections?
Okay, well, I'm going to start. There is a lot of information that I heard right now, and I'm just going to go into address it one point at a time. First, the king has not reformed anything. He brought his own view of what Morocco should be, and granted that he tried, and in the first 6 years of his reign, like I said, we have seen a rapid growth. But what happened after that is that we cannot say that he included marginalized segments of the community, because if it was the case, we wouldn't have about 65 to 70% of Morocco living under poverty level to this day. There are a lot of it boggles my mind that Morocco is kind of separated or segregated. There's the good Morocco, or the profitable Morocco, and the non-profitable Morocco. And it pains me that Morocco is being divided as such. The non-profitable Morocco is basically little villages that don't have schools. And this brings us to the school system and the education system. Yeah. We cannot blame the youth for not being able to contribute to the political life in Morocco, because they were never taught that in school. The school system and the education system is severely and poorly and grossly inadequate it doesn't prepare them for a life of contributing to, basically, they don't encourage them to volunteer their time.
Well, point well taken there. Point well taken there, Siham. A final word to you before we come to emails and thoughts from the viewers, Ali. I mean, it seems that this young population, dynamic potential is there, but according to Siham, they're actually not prepared for participating in a democratic process.
Well, let's go back to the reforms. The protesters were asking for reforms and change. The reform was the Constitution. The new Constitution actually separated the three powers, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary as well. So it is up to the new government to apply those powers, and it's not to the king. The king now is on the sideshow, as it were, to see how the political operators will be operating in the future. So it's nothing to do with him anymore. They want to change the new government. This is a new the party that has never actually been in government.
No experience.
Well, it doesn't matter. They have been in the opposition for the last 20 years. So it's not actually because they have not been in power that it means they are not experienced at all. They have very able people on board, and they can actually, to be honest, they are actually second to none. They are one of the elites of Morocco. So one has to wait to see how they're going to operate, whether they will be able to implement the new constitution's articles, because there are several articles in there that the new executive has the power to implement, and that needs time to be done. The other
we're going to go into details about the dynamics of these constitutions and how it might be applied in reality, and also whether it would satisfy the needs of people like Siham there in the US, who feel that the whole thing is walking rather slowly. But we also have some thoughts on what you think, viewers, on various topics that we've been covering here on Africa Today. And we'll be looking firstly at our Facebook fan page. And we have a comment from Taya in Nigeria, who's very worried about what's going on in Somalia. Africa Today, can someone explain to us what US drone strike in Somalia is all about? They claim to target terrorists, but a mass killing of Somalis is what we see. What is the UN doing about this? Aren't they supposed to intervene? Moving on to our emails, in Ghana, Kin has some thoughts about Muslim and Christian cohabitation and living in peace together. And Kin says, I am a Christian living in Ghana, and lots of my friends are Muslims. So I don't agree with Israel when they say Islam is a problem and that they have to confront it in Africa. Us Christians don't want to fight each other, especially our Muslim brothers. And moving on to our text messaging service, we have some words from Isa, who addresses the topic of discussion today in Morocco. And Isa says, I think people should give the king and the new government a chance to see through the reforms. If they are not enough, then we will demand more. A very middle-of-the-road point of view there. Do you agree? Keep your thoughts flowing. Email africa@presstv.co.uk, or you can text +4478 0000 8086. And of course, our ever-growing Facebook fan page, thank you so much, people, is Africa Today, Press TV, London. If I could come to you there, Dr. Saheeb, it would seem, I mean, the last comment we had there from Isa is that give them a chance. Is it just a question of time for this transition to take place? Because Ali is saying the king can't do anything about it. It's up to the politicians to make it happen.
Well, the king does have a guiding role, which he does indeed play. And he plays a difficult role, trying to juggle the French and the American demands, so they're not dependent on one ex-colonial power at all, investment from the Gulf states. But there is a big difference between reform and revolution.
Clarify, what are the demands in particular from France and the US that you are concerned about?
Well, outside countries like to kind of get hold. Morocco is a very resourceful country, a very rich country in agriculture. It's all still manual agriculture. A lot of people want to get in there and industrialize the agriculture. Fertile soil, since the Romans, it was the breadbasket of Europe. There are a lot of people who want to get in there and get control over those resources. There are also minerals and so on. Now, the French are competing with the Americans. The Gulf states have an interest as well. And just like in Libya, we find that when protests take place, they're not always genuine, they're often engineered. And people want revolution to destroy an existing system in order to take over. And if you smash it together and then have to build again, it's going to be much more painful than if you wait a little bit to let some reforms take place. So I think one should give it a chance, because reform is ultimately preferable to a destructive revolutionary process.
Siham, what are your thoughts on that? There's some question about whether the genuine nature of the protest, and that some people may have been fueling it for their own agenda.
Well, first I'm going to take a step back and talk about the Constitution and the reforms in the Constitution. And I would like to correct a huge misconception saying that the king has receded some of his powers. In fact, it is the very same old Constitution with the very few changes that give the royal institution even more powers. So instead of separating, the executive, legislative, and basically all the three powers, instead of separating them, basically we see that the king is actually overseeing each and every single one of them, not to mention that the new prime minister who got a new title, and he's basically just there for show. He's just a spectator, to the point, just as of now, the King Mohammed VI has violated the Constitution, especially Articles 47 and 49, that says that he cannot appoint ambassadors to different countries unless he basically consults with the Prime Minister and with the Council of Ministers, which has not even been formed. So as of now, we see that, there's a violation of this particular Constitution. And the Constitution as it is does not even qualify to be called a Constitution in 2011 for human beings.
Siham, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I mean, you were listing there quite a lot of concerns about the Constitution basically being ignored, and also bearing in mind what was said earlier about the population, which might not be politically sophisticated. These dynamics could just go over people's heads, and people be not aware that the king could essentially, as Siham says, be abusing his power.
Well, he's not actually abusing his power. I mean, he's still the arbiter of the political scene. So, but you have to give a chance to the new government. The people are already condemning the government and what it's going to do. Well, it's not even actually in place yet. If the king has nominated new ambassadors, there is no government yet. The government is going to be nominated this week or next week.
Right.
So there is no government. So there is still no executive. The new executive is not operational. So that's why he actually went ahead and did this. So if that happened after the new government is in place, then that would be a different case altogether.
But do you feel that the new government actually has the steel within itself to actually take the power that it's supposed to have?
They have the will to respond to the people's grievances, to the people's demands. And these demands, they are part of their manifesto themselves. The new party, or the party that's going to be dominating the coalition government in future, they do actually have the same thing. They want to eradicate corruption. They want to respect for human rights. They want employment for all the younger people. You mentioned about the protests. The protests are by the 20th February movement. The 20th February movement initiated the protest, and the king actually responded to that. And they are still protesting, and they boycotted the elections. What they should have done, they should have either formed themselves into a party so they could play a major role within the political spectrum of Morocco, or integrate into the existing parties so they can actually change things within these parties, because most of these parties are dominated by old guards, people who've been there for 40 years, 50 years. They need to change, and that's what's needed in Morocco, is the change at the top of the political parties in Morocco.
Yeah, and allowing young people to have a much more dynamic role within the process. Do you think the February 20th movement missed the boat, as Ali says, in their strategy?
Probably did. And also I think people who focus on the role of the king missed the boat, because I'm no monarchist. We're broadcasting here from a country with a monarchy. The royal family has immense power. I'm no monarchist.
But not over constitutional matters.
Well, we don't even have a written constitution in Britain.
Right, but they don't have power that impacts on people's life like the King of Morocco does.
But the King of Morocco holds his country together. There are people who want to set them up against each other. For example, the conflict between Arabs and Amasari, the Berbers as they are known. People like to create these conflicts in order to create a situation where they can take control. If the king is gone, then what? Who takes over? Some French-approved or American-approved figurehead, president, with no status, with no reputation, nobody knows who he is. I think it's not going to help Morocco. What helps Morocco is investment. What helps Morocco is investment, particularly in education, because there is a real problem. What helps is to eradicate corruption. There is, of course, a problem with that because there's a lot of government employees. You can't just sack them, otherwise you have more unemployed. Right. But there is an archaic system in place that needs to be brought forward into the current times. But if you get rid of the superstructure that allows these changes, then none of that will happen.
Okay, yes. I'm going to give a final word to you, Siham. I mean, you've been challenged there. Okay, you're very good at articulating what the problem is, but what are you proposing as a solution? Is it a question of just get rid of the king and see what happens? What are you proposing?
I don't mind monarchy at all, but we need to have more institutions that have real power over kind of maybe in a way or another kind of neutralizes the king's power, because we are considered by every standard as being an authoritarian regime. When it comes to transparency, with Transparency International, it places us in the 85th kind of rank with 3.5 kind of score, which is very poor, and that is before the current constitution. I know that it was mentioned before that the new king basically formed a new committee to make up for people who were kind of mistreated before and marginalized before. But that happened after the death of his father, and in a way, we are when his father was alive, we couldn't dare tell him that he was a dictator. Right. And now, after his death, we're saying that he was a dictator, and this is how many people, how many lives that he has touched.
Right.
Currently, Morocco is known to be a black site, just with its alliance with the United States, and basically with it decided Morocco gets about $8 million a year in aid from the United States, only to become an ally and only to align with them in their war for terrorism, quote unquote.
Okay, Siham, I regretfully have to interrupt you there, but you know, we can see the strategic importance of Morocco, but at the end of the day, it's the will of the Moroccan people that's at stake here, and hopefully some progress can be made. Thank you so much to all our guests who've been helping us elucidate this problem. That's all the time we have today. Continue to email africa@presstv.co.uk, or if you feel inspired to, you can text us. Text +44 7800 8086. Thanks to today's guests, Ali Bahaiji, Dr. Saheeb, Mustaqeem, Blehr, and on the phone from the US, Siham Jihad. Henry is back next week for another edition of Africa Today, but until then, it's goodbye from me, Vuiswang Ngobongwana, on behalf of the whole team. Thanks for watching.